Vlog number 3, Chapter 16 through 22. Chapter 16. Cotton developed into a huge agricultural factory. Northern shippers gained profits from cotton trade. Prosperity of the North and South rested upon the slaves. Cotton accounted for half the value of all exports after 1840. South was heavily influenced by planter aristocracy. Economic structure of the South became increasingly monopolistic. The Cotton Kingdom of the South repelled large-scale European immigration, for fertile land came at a high cost. In 1860, there was 250,000 free blacks in the South. Slaves had no civil or political rights, only minimal protection from murder or unusual cruel punishment. The whip was a visible symbol of the planter's mastery. Quakers were among the first abolitionists. Garrison and others founded the American Anti-Slavery Society. Anti-slavery societies were more numerous in the South than the North. Abolitionists were unpopular for a long time in the North, but they made their dent in Northern minds. Chapter 17. 1840s territorial expansion dominated American diplomacy and politics. After Harrison and Tyler won the presidency, a financial reform came. It established a new bank of the United States. 19th century hatred for Britain grew because of memories of the two Anglo-American wars, and the pro-British Federalists died out. In the 1840s, a huge controversy involving the Maine boundaries started. A British route went through the disputed territory claimed by Maine by the Peace Treaty of 1842. Aroostook War took place against American and Canadian lumberjacks, who summoned local militia to fight in no man's land. In the campaign of 1844, Texas became a leading issue. In 1845, America invites Texas to join the Union. The campaign of 1844, the Whigs nominated Clay, the Democrats Van Buren, and Polk was claimed the dark horse. He would later win this election. Problems between Mexico and America arose over Texas. Polk sent 4,000 troops to the Rio Grande. Polk pushed Congress and they declared war. Polk sent Nicholas Trist later to negotiate a treaty. Trist negotiated the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in 1848. America suffered only 13,000 dead soldiers. Most of them died from disease. After this war, America's size doubled, while Mexico's was just cut in half. After the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, a new debate about the extension of slavery occurred. In 1848, gold was discovered in California, and thousands flooded into the state. California later became a state. It also avoided becoming a slave state. A new group of politicians, the Young Guard, wanted to purify the Union rather than patch it up. In 1850, Taylor died of intestinal disorder. Fillmore took over. He signed a series of compromises known as the Compromise of 1850. Out of the compromises, the North got California as a free state, and the District of Columbia could not have a slave trade. The South got popular sovereignty in Mexico secession lands, and a new, tougher fugitive slave law of 1850. Death of the Whigs ended national political arguments and gave rise to sectional political alignments. U.S. and China trade began to flourish. Kansas-Nebraska Act passed through Congress. This repealed the Missouri Compromise. Chapter 19. In 1852, Uncle Tom's Cabin was published. This awakened passions in the North towards the evils of slavery. Northerners and Southerners flooded into Kansas. Brutal violence began in Bleeding Kansas. Bleeding Kansas issue went into Congress. Senator Sumner was an anti-slaverite. His speeches condemned all slavery supporters. Buchanan won the elections of 1856 because there were doubts about Fremont's honesty, capacity, and sound judgment. Psychologically, the Panic of 1857 was the worst of the 19th century, but it wasn't as bad as the Panic of 1837. The causes were inflation caused by the California gold and overgrowth of grain and overspeculation of land and railroads. In 1860, Lincoln won with only a 40% popular vote. South Carolina threatened to cede if Lincoln was elected, and when he was, South Carolina left. The next 6 weeks, 6 other states also left, and in 1861, they created the Confederate States of America. Another compromise would try to be made, but Lincoln opposed it. Chapter 20. After the attack on Fort Sumter, Lincoln called for 75,000 volunteers. He also called on a naval blockade of the South. Lincoln said repeatedly that the war was to save the Union in order not to lose the border states. Border states were on the north and south border, and slave states but have not ceded, but could go at any time. At the beginning of the war, the South was handicapped with a shortage of manufacturing plants, shoes, uniforms, blankets, clothing, and food. The South depended on foreign intervention to win the war, but didn't receive any. Both sides eventually had a draft. The North emerged from the war more prosperous than before. The South was ruined by the war. Transportation collapsed, and supplies for everything became scarce. Chapter 21. Battle of Bull Run showed the North that the war would be a long, hard war, and it swelled the South's already too large ego. Second Battle of Bull Run, Lee crushed Pope. The Emancipation Proclamation freed slaves in southern colonies, but not in border states. Later on, blacks would be allowed into the army. In 1864, Lincoln was reelected. Grant captured Richmond and got Lee to surrender. The war was over. On April 14, 1865, Lincoln was assassinated by Booth. Civil War cost 600,000 men and $15 billion, but it strengthened the U.S., increased its power and reputation. Chapter 22. Southern way of life had been destroyed. Crops and farms were destroyed, and cities were burned down. The blacks gained freedom, but faced extreme discrimination. Lincoln believed that the South never legally withdrew from the Union, so restoration was to be relatively simple. Radical Republicans, however, wanted the South to be punished, but their bill never passed. Reconstruction Act divided South into 5 military zones. Women did not earn suffrage with the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. The Ku Klux Klan was founded in 1866. They scared blacks into not voting or seeking jobs. They sometimes resorted to violence to add to terror. In 1867, the U.S. purchased Alaska from Russia for $7.2 million. Reconstruction in the South upended the social and racial system. Republicans failed to improve the South.